Okay, hi. We're going to do a book review of the book Foxcatcher, written by Mark Schultz. Mark Schultz and his brother Dave Schultz were both world and Olympic champions wrestlers. They were my coaches in college at Stanford. That's how I got to know them personally. If you want to see Mark Schultz wrestling, the best match to watch on the internet would be the 1982 NCAA Finals at 177 pounds. He wrestled Ed Bannock of Iowa. Ed Bannock was a two-time returning national champion. A lot of people considered him the best wrestler in the United States at the college level. Everybody expected him to beat Mark Schultz and thought that Bannock was going to win 4 double NCAA titles. And these guys had a big I learned more from these guys, my wrestling coaches, than I did from any of my Stanford professors. So I think this book is especially useful to anybody who wants to wrestle. Mark Schultz was like the most mentally tough person in the whole world at that time. And it's pretty incredible. All right, the story starts though with his older brother Dave. Dave Schultz was to the sport of wrestling kind of like what Bruce Lee was to martial arts, an incredible technical wrestler. Dave, when he was a kid, he was fat, he was kind of weak, kind of slow. As a matter of fact, when I first started out wrestling at Stanford, as a team, we'd go run sprints, we'd lift weights, and Dave Schultz showed up, kind of fat. He was weak in the weight room. He was slow on sprints. I'm like, how'd this guy get to be national champion? He's fat, weak, and slow. But what was unique about Dave, first of all, let's go through his childhood because it'll make sense. He got bullied as a kid. He was dyslexic, kind of unhappy kid. He found wrestling. He loved wrestling. He'd ride around his bike from junior high and go all to the local high school. He'd drive over to Stanford. He's from Palo Alto, California, and constantly training with the older people. And very interested in absorbing all the technique. That was what was most unique about Dave. Technically, he was by far the best in the world. And when he was in high school, he beat the two-time national champion Chuck Agel, caught him in a throw, won Open Nationals, and he even went to Russia and placed in Tbilisi, the big Russian tournament at that time. The Russians were the best wrestlers in the world at that time. Mark was a gymnast in high school, and he has a real low VO2 max, not very good endurance, which would also make it typically impossible to be a wrestler with those features. Wrestlers usually are especially good at having conditioning. And then Dave would pick on his brother Mark. He would wrestle him, and Mark found that he would lose 50-0. But what he found he could do when he wrestled Dave eventually was just sort of stall and defend and stop Dave from scoring on him. Well, once Mark had learned to prevent Dave from scoring, Dave was the best in the world. He could prevent anybody from scoring. And Mark had some quick techniques. He's got good fast twitch fibers, and he's really quick, and he's very athletic. I mean, he was a fantastic gymnast. So that's how he became great. Plus, he had incredible mental toughness. It was very interesting to be around Mark Schultz. He was like the most intimidating wrestler in the whole United States in those days. And basically, he wouldn't speak to anybody for a week or two before a big competition. It somehow helped him to focus in his intensity, his energy. And I think that's one of the big secrets, too, of great achievers, is they're very focused on a few narrow things. All the stuff about be well-rounded, I think, is nonsense. Anybody who's great, they're not well-rounded. They have to be nice to other people, but they have to be narrow-minded and obsessed with focusing on becoming great at something. And the other thing, too, that I thought was interesting is, talk about some of these guys like the Schultz brothers. They weren't just better than the other guys. They were like 10 times better. I mean, Mark and Dave would wrestle guys in the Stanford wrestling room. They were all Americans, and they were just like freshmen in high school compared to those guys. But it was great being around them, and they were very helpful to me too. Mark especially, I went through a phase where I didn't even know if I wanted to continue college wrestling. And he's like, yeah, Pete, you're hanging around with the wrong guys. You need to move into the athlete fraternity, and then you come train with me for a couple months. And as soon as I started hanging around with Mark Schultz, all of a sudden you start believing in yourself, gosh, I could be good. And then the thing for any wrestler who wants to get good is you got to wrestle in the off season, in the spring matches and summer tournaments. And I went from thinking about not wrestling anymore after my sophomore year, and then I hung out with Mark. The next year I was Student Athlete of the Year at Stanford, set the school record for victories in a season with 39. He had a great influence on me, and he inspired everybody that knew him. He was fantastic. And both of these guys were great. And what I learned from Dave especially was what I would call incrementalism. Like you go to the average college wrestling coach, you ask them, how do I finish a single leg? And they'll show you two options from the feet, two options from the knees. You go to Dave. Dave will show you 20 options on how to finish a single from the feet and from the knees. No matter what the guy does, he's got a counter to the counter to the counter to the counter. And that's why he was so great, was because I've heard about this too in tennis players. The greatest tennis players, they don't just know what to do, they anticipate what their opponent's doing so far in advance that it makes them fast. So even though Dave physically wasn't that quick or that strong, it was like he just read your mind and knew everything you were going to do. So you could never score on him. I wrestled against Dave. Dave was closer to my size. So anyways, Mark, if you want to read like how he made himself from a gymnast into the best wrestler in the world, there's a tremendous lesson to be learned here for mental toughness and focusing all your energy on to one task. He was obsessed with it. And it'll help you a lot. I've seen this help a lot of guys. The guys in Stanford, they'll tell you the Schultz brothers had a profound influence on their life for the better. And so whatever you want to become good at, this intense obsession and focus on that precise thing really increases your ability to perform. So this is a great book. By the way, the book's 10 times better than the movie. I mean, watch the movie, enjoy it, and the documentaries were better than the movie, but the book is the best. So anyways, there it is.